My fiancée threw the ring at me and left me for a corporate heir. 2 years later, it kills her to see me running the tech firm that's devouring his entire industry. I don't believe in fate, but I'll admit this much. If Sierra hadn't spilled blue paint all over my transmission blueprint that night, none of this would have ever happened. It was 1 a.m. at the downtown vocational training center. The janitors had already done their rounds. Everyone had cleared out, except me, hunched over my blueprint with a lukewarm coffee and the rattle of fluorescent lights above me. I was finishing the specs for a hybrid rail system prototype when she came barreling in from the adjoining design studio. Didn't see me. Didn't look up. Just tripped over her own satchel and splattered half a gallon of cobalt acrylic across my work. She froze. I stared at the mess, my only copy, then at the girl in ripped jeans and a paint-smeared denim jacket. Her face said she was waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. Well, I said, giving the ruined page a slow once-over, I guess I've officially entered my avant-garde phase. She blinked. Then she laughed, sharp and unexpected. I owe you a coffee, she said, already pulling her wallet out. And maybe a new life. That's how it started. A spilled blueprint. A shared vending machine coffee. Her name was Sierra. She was 24, studying interior design, and had a habit of chewing pin caps when she was nervous. I was 27, working as a systems mechanic for city transit, and had a habit of working until I forgot to eat. She made fun of the grease under my nails. I teased her about designing lamps that cost more than my rent. We started seeing each other after our late shifts. Sometimes it was a slice of gas station pizza on the hood of my pickup. Other times, we just sat in the loading dock behind the center and passed a single pair of earbuds back and forth, listening to Nina Simone or Pearl Jam. Over 4 years, our lives became this patchwork of opposites that somehow worked. We lived in a loft above an auto garage I worked part-time at, just south of Denver's warehouse district. The place was a mess, bare bulbs, exposed pipes, creaky floors, but it was ours. We had mismatched furniture she collected from estate sales, a second-hand record player that skipped on every other spin, and a cat named Tread who refused to sleep anywhere but the laundry basket. Money was tight, but we made it work. Ramen nights were our thing. So were midnight walks to the bodega. She'd tell me about her professors and color theory. I'd tell her about torque sensors and failing welds on the D-line trains. When I proposed, it wasn't in some fancy restaurant or on a mountaintop. It was right there in the garage loft, with grease on my shirt and sawdust in my hair. I'd been doing double shifts at the welding plant for 6 months just to afford the ring, a simple diamond on a twisted silver band. She didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, like she already knew. She posted it that night with a photo of the ring and my stained hands in her lap. The caption read, "Forever with my handyman heart." And for a while, it felt like forever was possible. But the truth? Our forever started as a spark that neither of us realized was already sitting next to a gas leak. And no amount of love, or ramen, or record skips could stop what was coming. The first time I realized I didn't belong in her world, I was standing next to a guy wearing a linen blazer and a Rolex that cost more than my truck. Sierra had begged me to come. It was the engagement party of one of her college friends, Lauren. Maybe Lana, someone from her design program who was marrying into a family that apparently invented bottled water or something equally ridiculous. It was out at a private estate in Cherry Hills Village, the kind of place with imported stone fountains and valet parking for people who never touch their own car keys. I'd rented a blazer the day before, even polished my boots. But when we walked through those wrought iron gates, I might as well have been wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit. Everyone there looked like they stepped out of a magazine. I got nods, a few tight-lipped smiles, but mostly, I was invisible. Sierra disappeared into the crowd the second we got there, hugging old classmates, laughing with women who carried handbags like trophies. I stood near the hors d'oeuvres table, nursing a drink and praying no one asked me what I did for a living. Of course, someone did. I got seated next to a guy who looked like he'd bench-pressed spreadsheets for fun and his wife, who wore pearls like they were body armor. The second I mentioned I worked in transit systems, the air shifted. "Oh," she said, blinking slowly. "So you fix trains?" I nodded. "I do more diagnostics now, but yeah, sometimes." The man chuckled. "So it's a hobby that gets your hands dirty." I forced a smile. "It's a job that keeps the city moving." He raised an eyebrow. "You ever thought about doing something more scalable? Like tech? Or consulting?" Before I could answer, another guy across the table chimed in. "Now that you're marrying Sierra, maybe it's time for a real profession, right?" I looked toward her, expecting her to jump in, to say he already has a real profession or even that's out of line. But she just smiled and sipped her champagne. Didn't say a word. On the drive home, I stared out the window. My blazer itched and my neck was stiff from clenching my jaw. "They were just making conversation," Sierra said lightly, like she hadn't seen any of it. "You can't take everything so personally." I didn't answer. That night, lying next to her in bed, I thought about the way she laughed with them, easy, fluent. The way she moved through that world like she'd been born to it. And the way her eyes kept skipping past me. After that, I started noticing things I hadn't before. How she dressed differently for brunch with them. Heels and silk tops, not the hoodie she wore with me. How she stopped bringing her design books home and instead started talking about internships with firms I couldn't even pronounce. How she'd say things like, "I just wish you could see how much more is out there." She meant well, I think. But slowly, I began to realize I wasn't the man she introduced at parties anymore. I was the one she apologized for with her eyes. The brunch spot was one of those places with succulents on every table and waiters who called you friend while handing you a $28 omelet. I didn't belong there, and I knew it before I even sat down. Sierra's mom waved me over with a manicured hand, already halfway through a green juice. "Darren," she said, rising slightly to greet me with the kind of hug that involved zero contact. "Thanks for coming." I sat across from her, napkin in my lap, trying to make sense of the laminated menu that didn't have a single item I recognized. "You know I wanted to talk before the wedding planning gets too far," she started, folding her hands neatly. "It's important to me that you and Sierra start with a strong foundation." I nodded, already bracing myself. "Sure, I'm all for that." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. Slid it across the table like a peace offering. "These are a few listings I found. Job openings in logistics, supply chain, even some junior management positions. Corporate ladders you can actually climb." I didn't touch the folder. "I'm happy where I am." She tilted her head, like I just said I was planning to live in a cave. "Darren, darling, you're 27. It's time to think long-term. Stability. A career with structure, not spark plugs and toolboxes." I felt my throat tighten. "I'm working on a new diagnostic system right now. We've been testing it with local contractors. It's got potential." She smiled again, tighter this time. "That's charming. But potential doesn't pay for private school. It doesn't buy homes in safe neighborhoods." She went on about benefits, retirement accounts, career growth. I stopped listening somewhere around the part where she called my job transitional. When the check came, I reached for my wallet, but she was already handing over a platinum card. "Let me," she said. "Consider it an investment in our future." I nodded stiffly and left without the folder. That night, Sierra was on the couch with Tread curled up in her lap, flipping through a wedding planner catalog. "How was brunch with Mom?" she asked without looking up. "She gave me job listings," I said. She didn't even blink. "Yeah, I figured she might." "That doesn't bother you?" She shrugged. "She just wants the best for us. Maybe it's something to keep in your back pocket. You know, just in case." Just in case. Like she was already preparing for a future where what I did wasn't enough. That night, I lay beside her with the cat pressed between our legs and the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead. Sierra talked about fabric swatches and cake flavors. I stared at the ceiling, quiet. For the first time since she spilled paint on my blueprint, I didn't feel like we were building something together. I felt like she was packing for a place I wasn't invited. Sierra called it a casual dinner with family friends. Said it would be low-key, that I didn't need to dress up much. So I showed up in my best jeans, a clean button-down, and the brown boots she once said made me look like a rugged magazine ad. But when we pulled into the country club parking lot and I saw the rows of black sedans and designer heels stepping out onto polished stone, I knew she'd lied. My old pickup looked like a rusted nail in a drawer full of silverware. The second we walked in, I caught eyes and glances, subtle ones, polite, but obvious. Everyone was in business casual or better. Blazers, dress watches, perfect teeth and smooth laughs. I tried to play it cool. Smiled, shook hands when introduced, made jokes about being the guy who gets his hands dirty while the rest of the city keeps clean. They laughed, just not in a way that made me feel like I was in on the joke. Dinner was a long, white table covered in polished cutlery and 3 types of glasses per person. I didn't recognize a single dish on the menu. That's when I met Victor. He sat across from Sierra and to her right, which meant she spent most of the night angled toward him. Victor had the kind of voice you couldn't ignore, smooth, loud enough to fill the space without yelling, and every sentence ended like it should be applauded. Harvard MBA, youngest partner at a consulting firm I couldn't even pronounce, played tennis on weekends and sailed for fun. And Sierra? She sparkled next to him, laughing too easily, asking questions about his firm like she genuinely cared, nodding like she already belonged in his world. I tried to chime in once, made a crack about how industrial systems could use consultants who actually touched the machines they analyzed. Victor chuckled. "We leave that to the guys in coveralls." Sierra smiled at that one. I didn't speak for the rest of the meal. By dessert, I was counting the seconds until we could leave. Victor had taken over the conversation completely, and Sierra didn't seem to notice or mind that I'd gone quiet. She looked alive next to him, like someone I didn't recognize. When we got home, I kicked off my boots and headed straight for the kitchen. Sierra followed me in, still glowing from the night. "That went well?" she said, grabbing a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge. I didn't answer. She looked around, then frowned. God, this hallway smells like oil again. Did you forget to wash your coveralls downstairs? I worked a double, I said. She wrinkled her nose. And the cat fur on the sheets? I thought we agreed to keep Tread off the bed. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just changing. She was erasing. Everything we built, the loft, the mess, the late-night takeout and tools under the couch, it all felt like a phase she was trying to scrub off her skin. And Victor? He wasn't just another dinner guest. He was the blueprint for a life where I didn't exist. She didn't even sit down. Sierra stood just inside the workshop door, arms crossed over her neatly pressed blazer, looking like she'd walked out of a business magazine ad. Her heels clicked against the concrete floor as she stepped around an oil stain, careful not to let it touch her. I looked up from my workbench, still wearing my gloves. You're early, I said. I'm not staying long, she replied, voice flat. I just wanted to talk. She didn't mean talk. She meant tell. There were still half-empty takeout containers on the kitchen counter above the garage ramen from 2 nights ago when she'd fallen asleep on the couch beside me. Tread was curled in the corner, blinking slow and lazy, like he already knew. I've been thinking, Sierra began, keeping her tone professional, and I realized something important. I pulled the gloves off slowly. Yeah, she didn't hesitate. I can't build a future on hope and duct tape. The words hung in the air like rust in the rain. She didn't flinch, didn't stutter, just stood there, polished and composed, delivering the blow like she'd rehearsed it. This life, the garage, the cat hair, the ramen. It was sweet, Darren. But it's not sustainable. I stayed quiet. She hated when I stayed quiet. Her eyes flicked to the toolbox beside me, then down to the ring on her finger. I want stability, she said. And I can't pretend anymore. You work hard, but it's all small scale. And I need. She paused. Not for breath. For effect. I need someone like Victor. Someone who has a plan. A real one. There it was. The cheap shot came next. She slid the ring off her finger and held it between her fingers like it was something she found under the seat of her car. This, she said, turning it over in the light. It looks like it came from a hardware store prize box. Then she dropped it. No ceremony, no hesitation. It clinked onto the workshop floor and rolled under the bench. I didn't move. Just stared at her. Heart numb. Jaw locked. She looked at me like she expected a scene. Maybe wanted one. But all I said was, pretending to love someone while waiting for them to become someone else isn't love. It's cowardice. That got her. Her lips twitched. She turned without another word, grabbing the duffel she'd packed earlier and slinging it over her shoulder. Tread me out as she slammed the door behind her. The ring stayed where it had landed, glinting between dust and metal shavings. 2 days later, while I was out making deliveries, her Instagram post popped up in my feed. Sierra and Victor on a white sand beach. Her hand in his. A caption written in script font. Real love. Real life. I stared at it for a second. Then I closed the app and went back to work. The system failed on a Thursday. Not just a glitch, complete failure. My prototype, the one I'd poured 18 months and every spare dollar into, gave the wrong output during a live demo for potential investors. One wrong signal sent an overcurrent to a test unit, blew a relay, and filled the room with the smell of burnt plastic and disappointment. They pulled their funding before I even finished apologizing. 2 days later, my business partner, Ray, called me from his car, engine running. I got an offer, he said. A real one. Full benefits. Steady hours. I didn't blame him. I just said, good luck, and hung up before he could hear the crack in my voice. Within a week, my lease was up on the loft above the garage. I couldn't make rent, not with zero income and a storage unit full of useless parts. I packed what I could fit into the back of my truck, my tools, a sleeping bag, and Tread's carrier, and drove to the only place that still felt solid. Nolan didn't even ask questions. He just opened the basement door and handed me a spare key. It's temporary, I said, standing beside a broken futon and a pile of old weightlifting gear. He shrugged. So is every storm. The basement was musty, and the ceiling leaked near the washer, but it was warm. Tread found a corner near the water heater and claimed it immediately. I slept curled around my duffel with my jacket for a blanket. During the day, I picked up delivery shifts, auto parts in the morning, warehouse supplies at night. Whatever kept gas in the truck and dry food in Tread's bowl. Nolan fed me when he could, slid a plate of grilled cheese or spaghetti toward me during late nights, never once asking how I was holding up. He just said, "You want another beer?" And that was enough. One Sunday afternoon, I pulled up outside a cafe near Capitol Hill, delivering a custom air filter for some boutique HVAC contractor. As I stepped out of the truck, the passenger door opened on a white SUV across the street. Victor stepped out first, sunglasses on, laughing. Sierra followed. They didn't see me at first. I should have walked away. I almost did. Then Victor glanced up, recognized me, and grinned like it was a game. Still playing with wires, huh? He called across the street. Maybe one day you'll figure out how to plug into the real world. Sierra didn't laugh, but she didn't stop him either. I said nothing, just climbed back into my truck and pulled away. That night, I lay awake on the basement futon, staring at the low ceiling and listening to Nolan's muffled footsteps upstairs. No rage. No tears. Just a flicker of something sharp and cold in my chest. They thought I was done. They thought that was it. But they just lit the last match I had left. I wasn't going to burn out. I was going to rebuild. Quiet. Focused. And this time, I built something they couldn't ignore. It started with an old whiteboard and a dying laptop on Nolan's coffee table. While Tread slept on a pile of clean laundry and Nolan played FIFA upstairs, I sketched out the first concept of what would become the diagnostic tool, an AI-based system that predicted failures in industrial machinery before they happened. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't going to be on magazine covers. But it worked. And more importantly, it mattered. I didn't have much, just my knowledge, a couple leftover sensors from the garage, and enough bitterness to power a small generator. But every night after work, I stayed up late, writing code, tweaking circuit designs, testing over and over. Nolan would come downstairs around midnight with 2 mugs of coffee and watch me work like it was some kind of therapy session. "You look like a guy who's already halfway out of this basement," he said one night. "I'm not leaving without pulling the ladder up behind me," I replied. He grinned. "That's the Darren I know." Once I had a working prototype, Nolan introduced me to a guy he knew, Travis, who ran maintenance for a metalworks plant out in Lakewood. Travis was skeptical until my tool caught a stress fracture on a belt pulley 2 weeks before it would have snapped. He called it magic. I called it a start. Word spread slow but steady. One plant manager told another. Then a construction equipment supplier emailed me asking for a demo. I started doing Zoom calls from Nolan's laundry room, wearing a clean shirt on top and sweatpants underneath. When one of those demos turned into a signed contract, Nolan popped a $6 bottle of champagne from the gas station and made us grilled cheese with the expensive cheese. "You're in business again," he said, raising a glass. "Not business," I corrected. "War." Over the next 6 months, I built a team, just 3 people at first. All people I knew from trade school or old jobs. Real hands-on workers. No suits. No buzzwords. Just knowledge and sweat. We opened a tiny office near the train yard. It still smelled like diesel no matter how much we scrubbed. But it was ours. And every month, another company reached out. By the end of the year, we had contracts across 3 states. The diagnostic tool didn't just flag problems, it predicted them with enough accuracy to cut out third-party consultants. It saved companies money, time, and downtime. And that's when I heard the most satisfying sentence of the year. "This could replace about half of what Victor's firm does." Turns out, Victor's empire was built on inefficiency, on charging clients to tell them things my system could detect in minutes. Suddenly, the same people who once laughed behind their wine glasses were asking for meetings with me. They didn't remember the guy who fixed trains, but they sure as hell remembered the name of the tool. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about proving something to myself, mostly, that I wasn't a face, that the dirt under my nails and the tools in my hands were just as valuable as their MBA spreadsheets. One night, I stood outside the warehouse-turned office and looked at the glowing sign we just bolted onto the front wall. Resonant Diagnostics. I thought about the basement, about Tread curled up beside the boiler, about Sierra laughing at Victor's jokes like I wasn't even in the room. And I smiled, because while they had moved on without looking back, I'd stayed in the fight. And now, I wasn't in their world. They were standing on the edge of mine. The summit was held in Chicago, in one of those sleek, towering hotels with carpeted ballrooms and branded lanyards. I'd been invited to speak on predictive technology and industrial operations, me, the guy who used to sleep under a staircase with a cat and a busted futon. Now I was standing backstage with a wireless mic clipped to my collar and a room full of executives waiting to hear what I had to say. I didn't expect to see Sierra's parents there. They were sitting in the 3rd row, her father in a stiff navy blazer, her mother with that same glossed-over smile she wore the day she handed me a folder of job listings. They didn't wave, didn't smile, just stared as I walked onto the stage. And in the 2nd row, on the aisle, was Sierra. She looked older. Not in a bad way, just different. Like someone who had spent too much time pretending to be okay. The glow I remembered from our ramen nights, the fire from those midnight arguments in the loft, it was gone. She didn't move when she saw me. Didn't blink. Just watched. I introduced myself. Talked about failure prediction systems, efficiency models, all the things that used to put people to sleep but now made them lean forward and take notes. Every few sentences, I saw heads nodding, phones recording. And Sierra? She stared at me like she was seeing a ghost from a better version of her past. After the applause, a line of people formed by the stage, industry leaders, tech consultants, even a couple government reps. I shook hands, answered questions, smiled for pictures I didn't ask to be in. Somewhere in that blur, I caught a glimpse of her father talking quietly to another man in a tailored suit. Sierra's mom just sat frozen, lips tight, eyes glossy. Later that night, I got an email from a name I hadn't seen in years. Subject, business opportunity. Body, Darren, I'm sure you're quite busy, but I'd like to discuss a potential partnership between our infrastructure division and your firm. Would you be open to dinner next week? I believe there's mutual value to explore. Roger Cartwright, Cartwright Industrial Holdings, aka Sierra's father. I laughed when I read it. The same man who once told me to grow up and get a real job now wanted to discuss synergy. I said yes, not because I needed him, but because I wanted to look him in the eye when the power shifted. The gala was the following weekend. A black tie event downtown, all polished floors and sculpted ice. I arrived late, deliberately. Let them wait. As I walked in, I saw Victor standing near the bar, scanning the room with tight shoulders and nervous eyes. His tie was perfect, his posture forced. He knew. He'd heard the whispers, how Resonant Diagnostics had slashed costs for 3 of his firm's biggest clients, how we were eating their margins alive. And then I saw her, Sierra, standing by the far wall in a silver dress that shimmered under the lights. She was staring at me, not blinking, not smiling, just watching, not with malice, but with something that looked a lot like regret. And for the first time, I didn't feel small under her gaze. I felt like the architect of a world she could no longer enter. She showed up without calling. The receptionist tapped on my glass door, eyes wide. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "She says it's personal." I looked up from a blueprint and saw Sierra standing in the lobby, soaking wet from the rain, blazer clinging to her shoulders, mascara smudged just enough to say she hadn't planned to cry but did anyway. I told them to let her in. She walked in slowly, hands clenched at her sides like she was holding herself together by force. "Darren," she said, her voice small, too practiced to be raw. I didn't know where else to go. I leaned back in my chair. "Really?" She didn't sit, just hovered near the door, eyes darting around the office like she needed to see what my life looked like now. "I left him," she said. "Victor. He turned on me, blamed me for everything that went wrong." I nodded. "That sounds about right." Sierra swallowed hard. "I was stupid. I see that now. I thought I was choosing stability. I thought I was building something smart, but," her voice cracked, "he only loved the version of me that looked good beside him." She took a step closer. "You were the one who saw me. The real me. Before all of it. I miss that. I miss you." She waited, like that was supposed to undo everything. I stood up, slow, walked around the desk and looked her in the eye. "I needed you when things were hard," I said. "When the roof leaked and the cat puked on the bed and the ramen had gone cold. And you walked away because that version of life wasn't good enough." "I know," she whispered. "I was wrong." The door behind us opened. Chloe stepped inside. She wore jeans and a company hoodie, holding 2 coffees and smiling like she always did when she saw me. "Hey, they ran out of hazelnut, so I got—" She stopped short when she saw Sierra. Her smile faded, just a little. Sierra froze. Chloe looked from her to me, then back to her. "Everything okay?" Sierra's lips trembled. "Is this my girlfriend?" I said. Chloe nodded. "Hi." Sierra blinked fast. "Right." I turned to Sierra. "You didn't want me when I had nothing. You don't get to want me now that I have everything." She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Security showed up at the door a second later, already briefed, already ready. I didn't have to say a word. She didn't resist. Just stepped back, tears sliding down her cheeks, arms shaking like she'd just run out of whatever energy had brought her here in the first place. At the door, she turned. "I gave you the best years of my life." I didn't flinch. "Then maybe you shouldn't have spent them waiting for someone better." She didn't answer. Security walked her out. Chloe stepped beside me, coffee in hand, and looked at the closed door. "Was that your ex?" I nodded. She took a long sip and said, "She's not coming back, is she?" "No," I said. "Not to this life." Chloe smiled. "Tread me out from his spot by the heater." And just like that, the past left the room. For good. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing people don't get about revenge, real revenge. It's not loud. It's not one moment of triumph. It's quiet, strategic, clinical. It started with a firm in Ohio, small, under the radar, and on the brink of being swallowed by Victor's company in a merger deal. They had valuable contracts with energy utilities, and Victor's consulting firm needed them to close the quarter strong. But they weren't happy. They'd heard about us, about Resonant Diagnostics, about how our predictive AI had cut failure rates in half for one of their competitors. They called us. We offered them a solution that not only worked better, but cost less and made them independent of outside consulting. They signed with us a week before Victor's merger closed. Then it happened again in Texas. Then in Pennsylvania. Every contract we landed chipped away at Victor's foundation. His firm needed those accounts to justify the valuation. Without them, the merger became a salvage deal. By the end of the quarter, it wasn't a merger anymore. It was an acquisition. Victor lost his title. Got demoted to a regional manager position. Middle management, stuck reporting to someone 10 years younger and twice as ruthless. The same man who once laughed at me across a dinner table now spent his days reissuing PowerPoint slides someone else made, while I gave keynote addresses on efficiency models he couldn't even begin to understand. I got the call from Sierra's father around the same time. He spoke slowly, with that stiff politeness people use when they've realized the person they once dismissed now owns the room. "Darren," he said, "I believe the time is right to bury the hatchet. There's room for forgiveness and synergy. We'd like to discuss." I hung up halfway through the sentence. No response. No message. Just silence. Let him sit in it. A few weeks later, I attended another panel event, this one on industrial automation policy, packed with lawmakers, CEOs, and legacy consultants trying to figure out how to stay relevant. I was seated on the end, listening as the moderator introduced the panelists. And last, but certainly not least, Darren Kane, CEO of Resonant Diagnostics, the firm many are calling the future of predictive maintenance. Applause followed. I caught Victor's eyes from across the room. He was standing in the back, half hidden behind a column, wearing a name tag and a hollow expression. He didn't wave, didn't smirk, just stared. And I saw it in his face, that sick, dawning realization. I wasn't the underdog anymore. I was the one who ended his career. That night, after the event, I stepped into the elevator and pulled out my phone. There was a text from Nolan. "Nolan, looks like your wrench finally turned the right bolt." I grinned. Not because I'd won, but because I built something real. Something that didn't rely on handouts, suits, or wine-slick promises. I didn't need to scream my victory. They all knew. Every person who once rolled their eyes at my work boots and calloused hands. They were now standing in the house I built, asking for keys I would never give them. And that was enough.